Hello, I'm the Old Geek, and I do apologise if anyone finds this video that I'm publishing now a little bit triggering. I got home from work last night and I put my computer on before I went to bed, and YouTube, with its lovely algorithm, recommended to me a video with a spicy title. The original rules for women in D&D are wild. Now, there's been a lot said across written and video type media about old D&D rules regarding female characters. There's been a lot of bollocks said, a lot of misinformation, people taking something with a grain of truth and twisting it and going rah. So, being the actually pedant that I am, I thought I'd take a look at this video. I've already watched the first 3 or 4 minutes or so, and it had enough of an effect on me to prompt me into making this video. So, but I haven't watched beyond the first 3 or 4 minutes. So watch this along with me and see what you think. Here we go. This fellow is called D&D Shorts. He is he's got over 500,000 subscribers, so he certainly doesn't need any of my help. And he has done in the past most of his videos about 5e. That's been how he grew, because of course it is the current thing. Let's see what he knows about old D&D. Well, wait and see what you think.
1970s were the Wild West for TTRPGs. Pre-Satanic Panic, first edition of D&D, and they're writing the rules as they go along. One of my favorite things to flick through is the Old Dragon magazine, launched in 1976.
Yes, Dragon magazine, launched in 1976, 2 years before AD&D. The first AD&D book was actually the Monster Manual in 1977, but that came out a year before AD&D rules actually came out, and the monsters in it are a hybrid between the newer AD&D style stats and older OD&D stats. So you've got OD&D 0 edition, AD&D 1st edition. The Monster Manual, the first Monster Manual, even though it said 8 for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons on it, what you actually got in there was something that didn't quite fit when AD&D itself was eventually released. For example, there were 4 of the alignments that didn't exist at this point, that aren't used in that. Monsters count down from armor class 9 instead of 10. Little things like that. But just wait and see what he says.
Which contained official expansions to the core Dungeons and Dragons rules. And some of these early expansions are insane. Like,
I've read through a lot of these early Dragon magazines, and yes, some of the articles in there are a bit weird. He's, though, framing them as official expansions to the rules. How can a magazine in its infancy, relying largely on articles supplied by people writing them in those early days, how can that be considered to be truly official? I know it's TSR's magazine, and I know people like Gygax, for example, did write for it. But to give the impression that these were official rules for D&D They're options. They're designed to give people ideas. Those people who were able to get hold of a copy of Dragon number 3, which certainly wasn't in this country.
Beyond your wildest nightmares. They're also amazing as a piece of history for this entire industry,
Correct.
and they are objectively hilarious to look back on today.
Correct.
Case in point, women in D&D from the
Ooh,
third
spicy.
ever edition of
There it
Dragon
is.
magazine.
There it
Obviously, these rules are not very PC, but this isn't meant to be like a takedown video. It was a very different time. We're going back.
He's not wrong, it was a different time. This particular article is on about, I read it a while ago. Written by Len Lakofka. I would not take this article remotely seriously. I have a feeling that Len was trying to introduce rules that would portray the type of female character that we saw in a lot of the literature that inspired early D&D. With that out of the way, let's move on.
50 years. We'll actually talk about how the designers who wrote this in the 70s look back on it today, because it's really interesting to see them discuss this original material with a modern lens. But what's even...
How many of those designers are still alive? There are a few writers and editors and artists who are still alive, but designers?
Even more interesting is how wild these rules actually are. But I'm not alone. I found a white woman digging through the trash outside my home like a starving raccoon. So let's see what she thinks.
Yes, I thought
Ginny,
you might recognise her.
You are women, correct?
I am. I'm all women.
Well, as woman, I want to see if you can pass this test. I'm going to read you out rules for playing as a woman in D&D 1st edition. Some of them are real.
I'm calling bullshit. As I've already said, this magazine was October 1976. When we say 1st edition D&D, we do not mean the white box. That's OD&D. It's it's giving the wrong idea to people who watch his content, because when you say 1st edition D&D, what somebody says 1E is referring to is they mean AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st edition, which, as I've already said, the Player's Handbook, the first proper rule book for it, came out in 1978, 2 years after this magazine. The Dungeon Master's Guide, which contained actual rule mechanics to run the game, came out in 1979, 3 years after this magazine. So these rules for women were not written for 1E. And they were just an article in a magazine. A magazine with a small circulation at that time.
And some of them are fake. And I want you to tell me which ones you think are real. In 1E, women do not have charisma scores. Instead, they have a beauty score which determines the outcome of all social encounters.
In 1E, AD&D 1E, I'm getting my pedant head on now with my well actually face, there were no stat differences between men and women, apart from a cap level on female strength. There were no pluses, no minuses. Everyone had the same scores, but there were strength caps placed on female characters at the point of creation, and these strength caps were varied by race. For example, human male fighters could get 18 100%. Human female fighters could get 18 50%. All human non-fighters were limited to 18 with none of the percentiles. So in order to be affected by that strength cap, A female human had to A, be a fighter, B, have 18 strength, and C, roll percentile dice of 51 or higher. Those are the only characters that would be, only human characters anyway, that would be affected by that. It did differ from race to race, and different races had different caps in terms, I mean, halflings. Male halflings were limited to 17 strength, female halflings 14. I think that was quite a big difference there. But the net effect of those caps tended to be more psychological. The standard, there was no official standard single stat generation method for first edition AD&D. There were a number of suggested ones in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and there was one in Unearthed Arcana a few years later. That was terrible. But the idea was that the DM would read through these stat generation methods, pick one, and say, this is what we use. And there were several of those which allowed rearrangement of your scores. And the net effect of having that strength cap on female characters was that if you rolled an 18 and you want to play a female character, you'd probably put it somewhere else with the knowledge that you didn't want to be affected by the cap. So what tended to happen is female characters the players tended to put a lower stat on strength, but then the higher stats elsewhere, which would lead to female characters having a slightly higher average on all the other 5 stats, but the male characters having higher strength. But in total, there would be no difference between the total amount of the stats. It just slightly pushed female characters away from being big, strong, burly warriors. You still got the dexterous female warriors, which of course these characters would not be burdened by that, but you tended to get the big, burly female fighters and more dexterous. Sorry. But you tend to get the big, burly male fighters and the more dexterous female fighters. And that's how it tended to push things, which is fine. Absolutely fine. I don't have a problem with that. Anyway, it is misinformation to say that female characters in any edition of D&D ever had a stat penalty on strength.
Yeah, so I know about this one. I know that this is real, unless you're trying to trick me by like, oh, it's in 1E, you said it was 1E, but it's in AD&D or something. But I do.
In AD&D 1E, female characters had a charisma score. They added a short-lived comeliness score in Unearthed Arcana, and they quickly got rid of it. But characters, male and female, had charisma, and they had comeliness. They were 2 separate stats. What they're referring to here is clearly this article which swapped charisma for beauty. Again, they're referring to an article written for White Box OD&D. Nothing to do with first edition, nothing to do with AD&D.
This one. I know about this one, and I read up on it because it's wild to me. First of all, because it basically reduces a woman's charisma to her looks. There's no way a woman could be charismatic in any other way. But also, it implies that men can't be beautiful, which is so sad.
Yeah, it is true. You're right. This is true. So all women's charisma-based abilities are dictated by their beauty score specifically. But yeah, as a flip side, it also means that men can't be hot, which we know is not true.
Absolutely not true.
According to this article, not according to official rules.
Okay, well, this kind of relates to the next one, actually. So, witches, spellcasting women of a sufficient level are called witches.
Got it.
Witches with a beauty score of 5 or below who successfully seduce a man will, instead of actually seducing him, scare him to death. True or false?
isn't this meant to be some sort of representation of the mythological sort of witch, the hags, things like that? This sort of mechanic would be fun in a monster, not a player character. Again, this was never in any official D&D rulebook. So...
Oh my god, I hope that's true. Can we bring that back?
I agree. This is true, and this is the best.
True?
This is my favorite one. Yeah.
True in a magazine article.
It's like if your Riz game is aggressive enough, men will kill themselves when you try to talk to them.
I was just gonna say this like takes the misogyny and wraps it all the way back around almost into like a power fantasy where you're like, you can literally make men kill themselves with the way that you look and act.
In mythology, there were some immensely powerful female characters. Look at the influence that the likes of Morgan Le Fay, Aphrodite, Helen of Troy, individuals like that, Queen Guinevere with Lancelot, for example. Look at the influence that they would have over male characters in mythology and literature. And that's what they're trying to achieve in this magazine article, I believe.
Okay, so I heard your feedback about wanting a more politically driven campaign, and we can...
This looks like an advertisement, so I'm going to skip past it. Yeah, he's obviously releasing something. Out now on Kickstarter.
Have a lower base wisdom score than adult men, or a young boy, or a young girl.
Oh.
Okay, the only version of D&D I remember age having any real impact to character creation stats. First edition AD&D, if you started as a young adult, which was up to the age of 20, you got a +1 to your constitution and a -1 to your wisdom. That was for both male and female characters. And then when you reached mature, you gained that wisdom point back and you gained a +1 to your strength. And then when you reached middle age, which was 41 or higher from what I remember, certainly for humans, then you started losing physical stats and gaining mental stats. And I quite like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There was no difference between males and females. And while the age boundaries were different across the races, again, there were no difference between males and females. So, I mean, this is false for the core rules. It might have been in a supplement somewhere. Probably this magazine supplement. We shall see.
I kind of feel like this one's false because when I was looking up about gendered ability scores, I feel like strength was the one that I saw as being different between the genders. But
Only the
I'm
cap.
wrong.
Only
Yeah,
the cap.
well, I mean, do you think it's possible? Like having? Do you think it's possible they could give an adult?
And just a note, the caps on strength during character creation and racial limitations and what have you, various caps, only apply to the point of character creation. Through adventuring, through aging, through magical effects, stats could go above and below racial limits. It was only the point of character creation where those caps and minimums had any impact whatsoever.
Woman a lower base wisdom score than a
young
girl,
woman.
like a child
Yeah.
girl.
That's so weird. I mean, I guess it is possible because anything is possible and people do stupid things all the time. But it seems unlikely. I also feel like if you're gonna be sexist, you're gonna be just as sexist to young women as you are to older ones. Like, in wisdom especially.
Yeah.
Like, if it was saying, oh, young women have a higher beauty score, then I'd be like, yeah, sounds about right for the way that these people think. But I don't know about wisdom. I'm gonna say false.
You know what? You're right. This is false.
I just need to point out that the most beautiful woman on the planet is in her 60s. Susanna Hoffs, if ever you watch one of my videos.
But it's a bit of a trick question because it is a real thing. It's just not from this set of rules. But you're right. In this set of rules, women are just down on strength. Everything else is the same. But this is from a third-party book called The City-State of the Invincible Overlord, which was released in the same year and was approved for use with D&D.
Third party.
But it is third-party, technically.
That's so weird. That also feels like one of...
Well, technically, yes. It was third party. You didn't need the word technically there. It was third party. So, things weren't particularly well proofread or play tested. When you look at these sort of third-party publications, and a lot of the stuff in Dragon magazine, which is very much, most of that was third-party, writers' contributions, all that sort of thing. Wizards of the Coast for 5th edition have a website, part of their website, which they have called Unearthed Arcana, and there have been all sorts of things that have appeared on there, most of which has been ditched. People don't consider what appears on there to be official. It's playtest, and I think the same lens and the same respect should be applied to what was in Dragon magazine and these third-party publications in terms of whether things are official. I played 5th edition from about 2000 and... When did it come out? Was it 2014? To about 2018-19. It pretty much lost me after Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Everything became too much of a power fantasy. I was trying to rein in the power and all the magic in the game to get a game that I wanted, and eventually it became too much work. It wasn't producing the type of game that I really wanted to play. Characters became too powerful too quickly. And since then, other people have released versions which give a better version, give a better style of play, while using core 5th edition mechanics than I could have done. Adventures in Middle-earth, Shadowdark being examples of taking the core 5th edition rules and making something that is much lower powered and making it work. But these Unearthed Arcana articles and Dragon magazine articles, they need to be taken with a grain of salt.
The few things that historically most cultures have agreed on is like wise older women. Like that, it feels like once women stop being beautiful, the only thing we've got is being wise, being a wise old...
Just remember the name Susanna Hoffs.
You can get the ways they take it away from you. Yeah. I don't really know what they're going for, but yeah, it's a thing. Very interesting. Okay, we'll do a simpler one. What do you reckon about this? Women are better thieves than men. True or false?
Ooh.
Are they referring to ex-wives? Sorry. Joke. This is... Well, if you take into account the psychological thing about assigning your stats and being more likely to play a thief and more likely to put a higher stat on dexterity if you are playing a female character, then taking that into account, that is probably... the answer to this is probably true, but I'm sure that's not what he's getting at. Because there's nothing specifically in the rules that say female thieves can do this better than male thieves. And that's a fact.
I feel like I could make the argument for why somebody might think that, but I know that thief is like such a sort of iconic, like D&D character,
Yep.
you know, archetype, that it would shock me if they were like, oh, it should be a woman. Well, first of all, women tend to be physically smaller, so I could see it leaning towards like, oh, it's easier to be sneaky, you know?
True.
But the sort of misogynist angle on it would be like, women are thieves who are out for money. It feels risky to keep saying false.
There are plenty of examples in history of women who've very much done that. Again, there were men that have done that as well. There are just people in history who've been out for money. It's just a bit of a stereotype, and you do see them. Yes. Was it on? It was on British television when a female comedian, Mrs. Merton, asked there's a British couple, Paul Daniels, who is a television magician, and his assistant Debbie McGee, a very pretty woman, and she's a lot younger than him. Mrs. Merton, who's a British comedian in a character. It was Caroline Aherne was the name of the comedian, but she was playing a character called Mrs. Merton, and she was doing an interview of Debbie McGee. And I remember she said something. I think it was her. Something along the lines of, "So what attracted you to the multimillionaire Paul Daniels?" It was intended to be a joke, but
I'm gonna say it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. This is true, but not for the reason that you said. It's nothing to do with
what
their
tenuous
size or
reason have you
dexterity.
found?
But high-level women thieves can cast spells. You don't have to have any levels in like a magic caster at all.
In AD&D First Edition, and various other editions of D&D, thieves have the ability to cast spells when reading them from a spell scroll. Yes. Thieves with a certain level of intelligence can read spell scrolls. They can't memorize the spells.
If you're a high-level woman and a thief, you can cast magic where male thieves just can't. You do have to have a intelligence score of 12 or higher, except for the spell seduction. You can do that even if you're stupid, apparently.
He's talking about the article again,
that
isn't
makes
he?
sense.
But yeah, interesting. So women, like if you're optimizing back in the day, you want to play a thief.
The problem is, when he says if you're optimizing back in the day, if you're optimizing and you have a copy of this particular magazine available for your table, and your DM has said you can use anything in this magazine, lots of if. Core rules, no.
It is probably optimal to play a woman, which is very interesting. So you got that one right. Yeah, you went with your gut and you were right. Yeah, absolutely.
Tenuous.
We're kind of in the spellcasting era now.
Okay.
I want to hit you with this one. Beautiful women get access to special spells that I'm putting this in air quotes here. Ordinary and quote unquote ugly women do not get access to.
I feel like that lines up with everything we've been talking about so far, and also it's so.
As I've said, the only official beauty stat we've ever had in D&D was comeliness, which was 1985, first edition, Unearthed Arcana, and it soon disappeared. And it didn't give you any extra spells, though it could affect your interactions with NPCs. That was basically it. So this whole beauty thing is coming from this Len Lakofka article, which means the answer to this, because it was written 2 years before AD&D, is false. And if he says anything different, he's wrong.
Stupid, because it's not like there's any sort of inherent like you're deciding if your character's beautiful or not. It's just incentivizing you to describe your character as beautiful, to like pick beauty as a trait. It's such a stupid thing to optimize around. It's not like whatever. But I think probably that's true.
Okay.
How many fictional and legendary women used and abused their beauty for gain? Have a think about that. Have a think about that.
I don't know if it'll affect your choice, but I will say you can't choose your scores in 1E. I think you
so it's fully randomized.
Yeah, so
You can't choose your scores, but the most commonly used stat generation method in first edition D&D, AD&D, was 4d6 rearrange. So you could choose, once you'd rolled your 4d6 and you dropped the one, added them all together, whatever, you could then rearrange. So, yes and no. Yes and no. It wasn't, people say, oh, it's really hard to be a paladin in AD&D. It It's much harder to be a paladin in the second edition AD&D than it was in first edition. Much harder. Because the default stat generation method in the AD&D second edition books was 3d6 down the line. 4d6 rearrange was an optional method. As I've said before, in first edition AD&D, there was no default stat generation method. There were 4 suggested methods in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then 1 really bad method suggested in Unearthed Arcana. And the DM could choose might be able to consult. Most DMs would consult with the players. Which one do you want to use? Which method do you want to use? And some of them involved rearranging the stats. So, yeah.
It's a random beauty score between 2 and 20 is what a female character
In
has,
the article.
using these character creation rules. So you can't just choose to be beautiful. You're kind of given what you get in 1E.
I see. I didn't realize because now we
1E.
get to even if we roll scores, we get to pick where we put them. I didn't realize that was not true.
Not
in early
1E.
D&D. Yeah, I guess that makes slightly more sense, at least, in that it's not just incentivizing you to decide to play a beautiful character. It's like you're just randomly getting a bonus or not. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm leaning towards still thinking that it's true just because... But you also said that the seduction spell, if you're ugly, can kill people. And seduction seems like one of those spells that would be gated to a higher beauty score if there were spells gated to a higher beauty score. So maybe it's false. I'm going to say false. Final answer.
Yeah, you got it. It's false. Yeah, for the exact reason that you said.
Just like everything else in this video.
You don't get different spells, you don't get extra spells, but the spells you cast do different things depending on how beautiful you are. Good job. Like I haven't been counting, but I feel like you've got almost all of these correct. Pretty much all of them. So you're doing really well. There's only a couple left.
I probably get like half points on some. I do feel like you kind of led me to the right answer on this one by being like, if it changes your answer, here's some information. And then
Arbitrary
I
answers,
just wanted to make sure you said something. You were like, oh yeah, because you can just choose to be beautiful.
Right,
but yeah,
right.
in the earlier rules, it's a lot more like cutthroat. It's like I think you get what you get. Which when people talk about liking,
in basic D&D, Beck Me, BX, that sort of stuff, you got what you got. You could do the take 2 points off one stat to boost your prime requisite, but it was 3d6 down the line. Different game.
original edition D&D, I think they really like that brutality. They're like, there's not
glad
this,
he's
like,
just said
modern
original
sensibilities
edition.
of, like, play.
I'm glad he's just said original edition, because original edition and first edition are two completely separate entities.
What you want. It's very much like, no, you play what you're given.
I feel like if you stripped all of the, like, weird, dated, like, sexy...
Sorry to keep pausing this, but I think, for me, playing what the dice gave you, certainly in basic D&D, or more recently in OSE, is one of the... It's a benefit of the game. I like to sit down before a game session and roll myself a character and go with whatever the dice give me. I enjoy that. But I get that not everybody wants that. I find that sort of inspires me to maybe create something a little bit different based around whatever stats the dice decide I have. I mean, I might get a bit annoyed if I was to get 6 first level magic users in a row, all with 1 hit point, but such is life. Anyway, moving on.
And racist shit out of these earlier editions.
What was that she just said?
Racist shit out.
Oh, are we on this?
Stripped all of the, like, weird, dated, like, sexist and racist shit out of these earlier editions. It could be fun.
There's a bit of clumsiness in the earlier editions, but sexist and racist shit, to use her words there, it's been completely overblown. Heavily overblown. It's more clumsiness, and it's, you have to go looking for it. I defy anybody to find anything sexist or racist in the vast majority of AD&D material.
to play a game where like everything's fully randomized and you just have to deal with what you get. Like, I think there's appeal to that in some ways.
Yeah, there is.
Especially if you're playing like a sort of meat grindery game where like death is more common and you're just trying to like make it to the end. And then maybe when you roll up a new character, maybe you'll get lucky and it'll be better than the last one that you had. Like,
that's true.
I can see the fun of that. But of course,
it is fun.
Randomizing your beauty score for female characters only, that I don't think is nearly as fun.
Get this one.
That's only the article.
Cool one. If a male cleric gets a 7 or below to resist a woman's seduction, they have sex, and the cleric loses their celibacy and all perks associated with being celibate.
You know, if you're...
I can't remember anything in AD&D regarding perks for celibacy. Now, if you, as a player, choose a god of celibacy, abstinence, that sort of thing, and you then don't follow those tenets, then it would be thematic for your deity to withdraw some of the power, or maybe even all of it. Maybe you'd have to go on a quest or commit some form of penance. But I've never seen any rules in any version of D&D or any supplement where a cleric has had to be celibate. If somebody can show me some in official publications, then I'm willing to be proven wrong. But there you go. I've said my thing on this one.
Making stuff up, you're doing such a good job making it sound like it's part of the real rules. I could absolutely see that being true. Because there is such a weird obsession with like imagining your characters being forced to have sex in like early D&D.
No, there isn't. Not that I've ever found.
It does feel like there's a lot of, you know what I mean? Like, that's such a weird thing to do.
No, you're right. Like, I haven't...
No. Please, find the examples. Show me.
I haven't thought about it, but you're right. It is like a theme.
No, it isn't.
It's so specific that makes me worry that it's false, but it would make... I do think that all of the pieces of that make sense. Like, it would make sense that if you played a cleric, you'd have to be celibate, but then there would be, like...
If you had a god of celibacy and abstinence, maybe. But if your deity, if you worship Aphrodite, for example, or a Norse god of fertility, Frigga, think, then you're not going to be celibate.
Oh no, it's a trap. You're going to be uncelibate if this...
Or if you worship Pan or Dionysus, Zeus, any of the gods that put it around a bit. I mean, the Greek gods and goddesses were at it all the time.
Woman seduces you. Like, I could see all of that making sense. If you fail your save and then... I think I have to go with false. I hope it's false.
I'm going to say now, it is false, because what rules exist for celibacy giving any sort of power to male clerics? Find me them. There's your challenge.
It's true, Ginny.
No,
it's true.
No,
bollocks.
That's so bad.
That's bollocks.
There is a sort of power
No,
dynamic in
was
like
right.
having a body so good that a guy forgets how to cast Revivify.
I am going to say, and I've mentioned it before, there are a lot of instances in literature, in history, in legend, of women using their assets to make men fall from grace. It is a trope, and a lot of early D&D stuff was based on this old literature, history, and mythology, because those were the sources they had to pull this information from? But still, I've never seen any mechanics in any form of D&D regarding celibacy.
It's like,
Yeah, you know what we need to do? We need to take these rules and rework them into a supplement that's about, like, weaponized sexuality for female characters.
No, please not.
They
Please
say
don't.
so much about how these game designers thought about men and women. Like, I think they say a lot about how they were thinking about, like, the way that the sexes interact.
so yeah, it says a lot about the 1970s, you know, just
Yeah.
generally, and like, or I mean, these people were born in the 1930s, you know.
30s, really? I haven't got birth dates to hand, but I have a feeling you're talking more 40s and 50s. You might have the odd one who was born in the 30s. Don't know how old is Tim Kask now? I don't know, 40s, I would think. Maybe, I don't know. But I was always under the assumption that most of them would have been born about 20 years before. I was born in 71. You think of them being sort of in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s when they're creating D&D, which would have had them born early 40s at the earliest, maybe late 40s, about the same age as my parents.
Right.
So it's like it is a real insight into that. There is one final question
Okay.
here. I want to hit you on a true or false.
I'm ready.
If a woman successfully charms a humanoid monster, such as a centaur or gargoyle, that monster will lay down its weapons, kidnap the woman, and carry her off to its lair.
There are no rules for this, though there is an AD&D module where satyrs will try and lure female characters away. That is based on the mythology of the satyr. But in terms of rules, core rules, no. But I can, if it is in this article, I can see where it's coming from, because there's the whole trope of the damsel in distress, the dragon kidnapping the maiden, that sort of thing. A troll drags the woman away. That has always been a trope in fiction for as long as we go. So I actually don't see anything wrong with this as a story element.
True or false?
I mean, I can totally see the sort of fantasy-like themes that would lead to that kind of rule.
Correct.
I don't know if I believe, though, like, why would it just be humanoid monsters? Because dragons, historically,
point.
carry maidens off to their lairs all the time.
Ginny's
in
talking
media.
some sense now.
So I feel like
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
the restriction of humanoid monsters feels like a bit of a strange one. I mean, I get the impulse, right? Oh, the humanoids are the ones that want to take a woman back to their lair and have a pretty girl around. But, like, I think
what do you think, Ginny?
I think I have to say false. I have to say false.
Can't a lot of dragons
Okay.
adopt human
I
form
think it's
anyway?
false.
Yeah.
It is also true.
Oh my
It is
god.
true. Yeah.
You know what I think is so fascinating
In the
about
magazine
pretty
article.
much all of these rules is that even though they're obviously
They keep referring to them as rules. I think that's a little bit disingenuous. As I keep saying, it's a magazine article. It's not a core rule in any way. It's suggestions, probably not proofread or play tested very much at all, such as the nature of the construction of magazines back in the 70s, when they would have been looking around for material to bring in. So I think they're overplaying quite how official these were, because I would say they weren't.
rooted in sexism, and a lot of them are disadvantages to playing a female character. But at the same time, they imagine women as so powerful. Like, the idea that women can, like, seduce you in...
Look throughout history. Look throughout legend, look throughout fiction. Guinevere, Helen of Troy. You had an English king in the 1930s give up his throne for the love of a woman, Wallis Simpson. Sadly, my male friends, we have always been very one-dimensional and led by the contents of our trousers. And women have always had this power over us, have they not? It's a fact of life. It's a fact of life.
To doing whatever they want, or that if they seduce you and they're too ugly, that they can literally kill you. Like the just like the power associated with femininity in like a weird, like objectified way is so fascinating to me. It's not just like women are weak and useless.
What do you think about these rules? Like, would you
Ginny's
play with
right
them?
there.
Or like, would you seriously consider writing? Is that something we could see from you, or like, would you want to do that? Could you see someone doing this, like making these but for the modern day?
I mean, I don't think I would do it because, to be honest, I already get enough comments that are mad at me about whatever perceived feminist values they think my blue hair indicates on its own. Like, I personally, I just, even though I might have fun doing it on my own time, I just am too friggin' tired to put that kind of thing out on the internet. Like, it would just be it would be the worst week. I think, like, the tough line to walk with something like that is that if you're gonna, you have to kind of engage with like the way that gender does affect like different experiences in the world, which it does. Correct. Obviously, and that would be such a tough line to walk. Like, I think it's a line that everybody would want to walk a little differently. So Correct. I think that the people who would consume that supplement, there would be a lot of people who were not happy with how it was done one way or the other, because we all have like different, there's no sort different of like quantifiable one correct way to do that, you know? So I think it would end up being quite controversial.
So yeah, these rules are kind of crazy, and it seems like the designers...
Please stop calling the rules. Look, that last bit by Ginny was absolutely spot on. I think she's finished this video fairly strongly. I think he's misled her with some of his twisting of the facts in this video, unfortunately, because what he has painted here as first edition AD&D rules were not. It is as simple as that. So he's been very misleading, whereas in that last bit there, I thought Ginny was very good earlier on, but again, I think she was being misled.
Realize that because ever since second edition of D&D, men and women have been treated identically for the purpose.
Notice he's shown a copy of the AD&D second edition Player's Handbook. At no point has he ever showed a copy of the AD&D first edition Player's Handbook. Is he intentionally lumping White Box and first edition together for the purpose of making this video, or is he just ignorant of the differences? I don't know.
Of character creation. And watching the original designers talk about these rules now is really interesting. There's a video up on YouTube.
It's Tim Kask. Tim Kask worked for TSR. His main role, he was the editor of Dragon magazine. So he would have edited this magazine. Calling him a games designer? I mean, yes, he would have had some input. He played in those games. He's one of the few of the old guard who's still alive.
By Tim Kask, where he discusses the representation in early Dragon magazine. And he does seem like genuinely sorrowful for some of the depictions in those early years, particularly of people with mental health issues, but also to an extent women in the early game. He explains that
I just want to add a little reminder here that 2 of the original players in Gygax's game were his daughters.
Basically, these early rules were an attempt to get women playing the game, because D&D evolved out of...
Two of the original players in Gygax's game, earliest game, were his daughters. How is a badly written article in an early copy of a magazine that is unlikely to have been read by women going to have any impact on getting women to play D&D? I think that's just a bit of misguided nerdiness, if that was the reason why those rules made it into an article in Dragon magazine. I mean, were they just paying a bit of lip service? I don't know. I say, I've read the article, and look, Len Lekofka, who wrote it, he wrote a couple of good adventures. Though his writing style could be cumbersome. I encountered him a couple of times on Facebook, and he could be somewhat belligerent. I have a feeling he was one of the old school on the spectrum nerds, because of the way he put things across. And Secret of Bonehill and Assassin's Knot are both imaginative and interesting adventures, but they both suffer from the way they are presented, the way they are written. And I think that's a little bit down to his writing style. So I can understand him writing an article for a magazine which doesn't quite come across as intended.
Wargaming, which was literally exclusively only marketed at men. And
Well, yeah,
results
miniature
aside,
wargaming was a
that
male
is an
hobby.
admirable goal. According to 2023 data released by Wizards of the Coast, 40% of people who play Dungeons & Dragons are women. And we don't...
That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that we've got more people of all backgrounds, ages, whatever, playing role-playing games. Not every game should be written for everybody, because that creates a bland game, in my opinion. But I like the idea that a lot more people are playing role-playing games, and that there are games out there for everybody. But a one-size-fits-all game is not something to aspire to. It is as simple as that.
We don't really talk about WotC's big wins very often, but this is surely
They haven't had many big wins, certainly in recent years.
the best thing they've ever done. Up there with putting third-party content on...
Yes, it is a success that they've got more people from all sorts of different backgrounds playing, but has it made D&D a better game? I would argue not. That's just my personal opinion.
D&D Beyond and inventing the roving mauler. Yeah, look at the leg lion. Look at it. So yeah, the modern broad appeal of TTRPGs and gender representation among its players and its designers...
It's okay having niche games. I'll repeat it again. Yes, the hobby in general has a broader appeal. But games themselves, each game does not in itself have to have a truly broad appeal. Some of the most niche games are some of the most interesting for different reasons.
is basically a good thing. There's more funny things in these rules that we didn't get into, like how dwarven women need to have a higher beauty score to successfully sleep with a human man than an elf does. Which is funny, because I am all about...
Would my wife classify as being a dwarf? She's 5'1". I mean, look, I've never found dwarven women attractive, because dwarven women have beards. And I don't go for women with beards. My wife may be short. She doesn't have a beard.
Not those 4'7" babes who could crush my head like an egg with one hand, but apparently that's not normal. But in my heart, I'm just fascinated by game design and game designer intent, their failures and their successes, and what they tell us about the world at the time these rules were created. As such, I love that these rules exist, and I love that there is a library we can go back to from 50 years ago and see how they played games back then. I donate 50% of all YouTube ad revenues to charity, and the rest of the ad money goes on paying for the videos to get edited, which means this channel...
I spend none of my revenue on editing, and none of it goes to charity, because I don't get very much. All of my revenue gets me to conventions, basically, and gets me my gaming stuff, which is there, which I then in turn give back to my community. So there we go.
The channel is 100% supported by you on Patreon. Don't worry though, it ain't for nothing. We've got awesome subclasses, species, rules expansions.
Okay, he's advertising now, right? Okay. So, in summary, I think he has intentionally misrepresented an obscure article in an early copy of Dragon that many people will never have seen, that existed 2 years before any AD&D first edition rules were published. I think he's misrepresented that as being part of 1E. It wasn't. I think initially Ginny was a bit taken in by some of it. I think she finished quite strongly. What she said at the end, I think, was right. But there was so much crap in there, so much misinformation. And if you look at the biggest problem I've got is I've heard so many bad things said about these old game designers, and to some extent the beginning of my generation. I mean, I was born in 71. I'm a little bit younger than these guys that they're all on about. And I've read so many bad things written about them, and a lot of the bad stuff is due to out of context quotes, misrepresentation, twisting of words. But people with a big voice on the internet project these as fact, and thus their followers lap them up as fact, which is a problem. It's a shame. That shouldn't be done, because a lot of what is said in those critiques is just bollocks. Anyway, I've been the Old Geek. Hope I haven't pissed anyone off too much. See ya.